What is going on, guys? Psychic Guy 1 here. Welcome to my review of Soul. Soul is directed by Pete Docter and stars Jamie Foxx, Tina Fey, Angelina Bassett, Felicia Rashad, Rachel House, and Graham Norton. The story is basically about Joe Gardner, who is this guy who's like a middle school teacher, and basically he ends up getting offered by this person named Dorothea Williams, who's like a really famous jazz musician, and because of how like she impressed him, but then he's kind of preparing into falling down this manhole, and basically kind of in the way kind of like injuring himself, where he's like kind of close to death. So he kind of becomes a soul where he's just trying to make sure he wants to do more in life than what he ended up doing. He did not want to die now. So basically what he's trying to do is he's trying to find a way to get back into the real world and kind of just get back in his body and back into the real world so he can kind of complete his life. So the story is really good. Just the whole idea of it was something interesting, and I do feel like they did a good job kind of executing said story, and basically they did kind of do a good job kind of with it. And I like how they're doing like the whole thing of how it's a musician who definitely feel like his life wasn't really complete and just really wants to get back into his body because he just wants to complete his life, and it's a good concept, and I do feel like they do a good job kind of keeping it consistent and like kind of executing it pretty well. And it's just one of those concepts that does end up working out well, and it's just really interesting how they do it, and especially how they kind of do all these turns and make it turn into a complete story. And it's just really an interesting movie with like a good concept, and it's really executed well with everything of how he kind of end up falling down into manhole. Basically feels like he needs to complete his life, and does with 22 to try and make sure she unlocks the thing that like makes him go back to his own life. And it's just a really engaging movie for what it is, and it's just really interesting how they do this, and it's just a concept that basically just he executed pretty well, and they did a pretty good job with it. The whole structure behind the story is really good. You got the first act, which basically kind of starts out the movie showing Joe at his job, kind of like really showing how he's kind of passionate about jazz, and it's a good way to kind of introduce the character and what he likes, and then kind of like goes over and shows how she's kind of like wants to get into this band. Dorothea Williams is like a really good jazz musician, and it's just really interesting how they do it. And then basically it shows she was impressed with him, so they offer him, and basically ends up falling down this manhole where he's end up becoming a soul because he just really is near death because of it. And basically he just it doesn't really feel like he wants to be there, and it kind of like leads in the second act where he just doesn't feel like he wants to end his life. He just ends up going right to kind of this an area where he can kind of come back to life with 22, and basically like this whole thing where 22 has basically to try and bring back. And I do like how that kind of like the focus of the second act is they kind of go back. Then eventually once they kind of like get to the body, they kind of do this thing where 22 is in Joe's body and Joe's in his cat's body, and it's pretty interesting how they do that. I mean, it does bring a lot of comedy into it, so it does end up working, and it does also end up kind of like progressing the story a bit, kind of showing 22 and just kind of having Joe kind of like trying to like help 22 around, and it does end up making 22 somewhat find her purpose, and it's kind of like the whole climax, which it's kind of like set up as the third act where they'll probably get into later. And there's also it's the climax. You kind of see Joe's back in his body, and he just feels like he didn't do nothing. Like he wants to go back for 22. He kind of felt bad because she's kind of a dead soul now, so he kind of goes back and does end up kind of like making her back up and kind of like go back into the real world, and then the movie kind of ends with how Joe Gardner is given a second chance because of his bravery, and I do think that that's just really felt earned, and it ended up having a really an ending for what it is that really felt earned for this movie. The pacing is really good, as this movie does end up feeling complete by the end, and just really feels like it goes by pretty quickly, and it does feel like it did end up entering into the runtime, and did feel like everything kind of like needed to be there in some way, and it definitely did end up feeling like a complete movie, because that Joe Gardner's a really well written character. Just the whole way that he ends up developing in this movie is basically like, he kind of starts out a normal kind of music teacher. He just really likes it and wants to be in this whole band opportunity, and then basically he ends up obviously following the man home. He really does want to get back, but like he does end up progressing a lot with 22 throughout the movie, basically like kind of growing somewhat of a friendship with her, just definitely liking what she is, and kind of like figuring out what specifically her role kind of is, and it's just really well played to like kind of progress. I mean, after she ends up getting way league with Dorothea Williams and like performing, she does end up feeling bad for 22 and does come back for her, and does end up kind of like saving her a bit, and ended up giving a second chance to, which ended up being earned for him, because he did all of that, and basically he got a second chance out of it, so it really did felt earned, and his development definitely did end up doing pretty good, and it definitely felt like it was a really good progression of his character. A2 is a well-written character. She's basically like this character who's like this mentor for years, and basically eventually did end up finding her spark, and they definitely do a good job kind of doing that to their advantage. I mean, the real character's about is finding this spark, and she does end up finding it through Joe's body, but obviously like a person has become a dead soul, or like a brown soul, until old Joe Gardner does end up saving her a bit, and it's just a really smart way to kind of progress her character. I mean, I like how they end up writing her character, and it's just really kind of a good way of how they does it. Like, eventually she does end up having her spark, and she does kind of end up going back into the real world. I mean, and they do a good job with that, and I do really feel like you can kind of enjoy characters, basically, and you kind of do feel bad for her, because like she hasn't found her spark for years, and she eventually did find her spark by the end, and it's just kind of a well-known character arc, and just really a development for her. Voice acting was fantastic. You got Jamie Foxx, who ends up playing Joe Gardner. He does a really good job as Joe Gardner. Basically, he does really feel like the character. Each line delivery that he gives, he just feels really confident, and there's also Tina Fey as 22, who's just really confident in her role, and it just feels like they give a lot of passion into their role and just really tried. And the same kind of goes for all the other voice actors. I mean, they all do a really good job and really feeling like their prospective characters, and just really trying in their respective roles. The animation is fantastic. It's basically, the whole looks of the soul is just looks really good. I like the way they kind of make them look ballooned, still kind of like look different. I mean, I really think they look complete, and it's just a really good design from what they did with it. And basically, they all had like the humans, which have like pretty smooth movements, and also just look pretty good. And it's just a similar kind of human style that Pixar usually does, and it still looks pretty good in this. And they do a good job, like, kind of making the movements feel smooth, and they also kind of use the backgrounds and as basically kind of like feels like a New York City that you have fictional, and it's just really like the looks of the New York City, and as well as just the whole soul world that they kind of use, and it's just ended up looking really gorgeous and just complete. Soundtrack is really good, as they do a good job making it really feel into the moment, and it just really fits well into the movie, as it kind of like fits into what's going on screen each time they kind of use something in the background, and it just ends up coming off as really smoothly and just really works for the movie, and just really ends up fitting into the scenes that they specifically put it in. With that said, I do have a few minor negatives. I mean, there is like the third night breakup that probably could have been executed a little better. I mean, I feel like this could have really been executed better. Basically, I mean, a lot of movies use it nowadays, but I feel like in this movie specifically, it definitely could have been executed much better, and it definitely did feel like it was a bit like out of character and being like that, and just felt like a bit out of nowhere to kind of do that, as it's just kind of just there to kind of have the rest of the flaw happen, but like that's really the only minor flaw I really have with the story. Then as for her character's part, I definitely feel like there's a few characters that could have been left out of the movies and really feel like Jason Purvis and kind of like had a bigger role than they really needed to. It basically, I do feel like they definitely could have dropped a few of the characters, but other than that, so I don't really have any other negatives of the movie. Overall, Soul's another fantastic movie from Pixar, and it's definitely one of the better animated movies of last year out of the few that we got. So I'm gonna give Soul a 9 out of 10. That was my review of Soul. What are your thoughts on Soul? Tell me in the comments below. And I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.